On my 18th birthday, my mother didn't give me a cake or even a birthday card. She threw a legal eviction notice and DNA test results onto the kitchen table, results I never even asked for. She looked me dead in the eyes, without a hint of remorse, and told me I wasn't her child because I was born broken. And she wasn't obligated to spend another cent on someone who had sucked the life out of her for 18 years. In that moment, I realized the next 30 days would either be the beginning of my life or the end of it. My name is Ethan, and for the last 18 years, I've lived with the constant weight of knowing I was a burden. I was born with a rare hip deformity that required 4 major surgeries before I even turned 10. My earliest memories aren't of playing with friends or going to the park. They are the smell of antiseptic in hospital wards and the endless, muffled shouting matches between my parents over how to pay the next surgeon's bill. My father walked out when I was 6. He didn't even leave a note. He just packed his bags and vanished, leaving me and my mother, Sarah, in our small house in suburban Ohio. Sarah never bothered to hide the fact that she blamed me for his disappearance. Every limp in my step, every bottle of painkillers she had to buy, was a personal reminder of her ruined life. We lived in that house together, but it never felt like a home. It felt like a long, drawn-out war where I was the prisoner and she was the guard. I tried my best to be invisible. I started working when I was 16, as soon as I could stand on my feet long enough to move boxes at a local warehouse. I gave her every single paycheck, hoping it would somehow soften her heart. I thought if I brought home enough money, she would finally see me as a person rather than a medical mistake. The morning of my 18th birthday started strangely. The house was quiet. Usually, Sarah was slamming dishes or blasting the TV, but that day she was just sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for me. A yellow envelope was sitting right in front of her. For a split second, I thought maybe it was college paperwork or something to do with the savings account she claimed she was building for me. But when I pulled the papers out, my hands started shaking. It was a formal notice drafted by a lawyer. I had exactly 30 days to vacate the premises. "What is this, Mom?" My voice cracked, sounding like a pathetic whisper. She didn't even blink. "You're not my son, Ethan. Technically, you never were. I took the test 2 months ago. You're the result of a hospital mix-up or something else, I don't really care. But the point is, I spent the best years of my life nursing a stranger's defective child who cost me my husband and every penny I ever made. You're 18 today. The law no longer requires me to provide for you. I've sold this house, and the closing is in 30 days. The new owners don't want any strangers lingering on the property." I stood there, clutching those papers, feeling the entire world turn into ash around me. The woman I called Mom, the person I worked myself to exhaustion for, despised me so much that she viewed my adulthood as her personal Independence Day. She wasn't just kicking me out. She was erasing 18 years of my pain and struggle, claiming I was a nobody to her. Included in the documents were the test results. Probability of kinship, 0%. She had found this proof and sat on it in silence, waiting for me to wake up on my birthday thinking I might finally get a break. I didn't cry. My throat was too dry for that. Only one thought pulsed in my brain. I had exactly 30 days to find a place to go where people wouldn't wish I were dead just for existing. Sarah stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the kitchen without a final glance. She just went to work, leaving me alone with the eviction papers. I looked down at my leg, which was starting to ache from standing too long, and realized this month would be the longest of my life. I had no friends to turn to, no place to go, and almost no money because I had handed it all over to Sarah for household expenses. I walked out to the porch, sat on the steps, and watched the neighborhood. Neighbors were mowing their lawns. A dog was barking somewhere down the street. Everything looked so normal while my entire reality had just been detonated. I realized that the truth about my birth wasn't just a medical fact. It was a bomb Sarah had planted under my life a long time ago, and today she finally decided to press the detonator. The first day of my final month in that house began with me packing my few belongings into an old backpack, just to feel like I had some shred of control. But the more I thought about her words, the more questions I had. If I wasn't her son, then whose was I? And did she know the truth much earlier than she claimed? These thoughts kept me awake as I sat in my room, listening to the clock on the wall tick away the minutes until I'd be on the street. I didn't know then that this secret was only the tip of the iceberg, or that over the next 4 weeks, I would discover more about my family and the money that supposedly vanished from my surgeries than Sarah ever wanted me to find out. But right now, all I had was rage, an eviction notice, and 1 month to survive. The second week started with a silence so heavy it felt like the walls were closing in. Sarah didn't speak to me at all. It was like I had already become a ghost in the house I grew up in. She started bringing cardboard boxes home every evening, taping them shut with a sound that ripped through the quiet like a gunshot. She was packing her life, her memories, and her future, and none of it included me. I spent most of my time in my room, staring at the eviction notice, trying to understand how 18 years of life could be reduced to a single piece of legal paper and a DNA result that felt like a death sentence. I realized I couldn't just sit there and wait for the clock to run out. I had about $300 in my secret emergency stash, money I had managed to hide from my paychecks before handing the rest to her. It wasn't even enough for a security deposit on a closet in this town. I needed to know why she was doing this now. If she knew I wasn't hers 2 months ago, why wait until my birthday? Why the theatrics? I started watching her. Every time she left for her shift at the clinic, I would come out of my room and look for clues. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for until I found the blue folder hidden under a stack of old magazines in the back of the hallway closet. Inside the folder weren't just medical records. There were bank statements from an account I never knew existed. My father, or the man I thought was my father, hadn't just disappeared and left us with nothing. According to these papers, there had been a massive insurance settlement from the hospital where I was born. Apparently, my hip condition wasn't just a birth defect. It was the result of medical malpractice during delivery. The settlement was for 6 figures. It was supposed to be in a trust for me, to cover my surgeries and my future. But as I flipped through the pages, I saw the withdrawal history. The account was almost empty. Sarah had been draining it for years. She wasn't using her hard-earned money to pay for my surgeries. She was using my money to pay for her life, while telling me every single day that I was a financial black hole. She had bought a new car 5 years ago that she said was a gift from her sister. It wasn't. It was my physical therapy fund. She had paid off the mortgage on this house 3 years early. That was my college fund. The realization hit me harder than the DNA test. She didn't just hate me because I was defective. She hated me because I was a constant reminder of the money she was stealing. On day 10, I confronted her. She was in the kitchen wrapping plates in bubble wrap. I dropped the blue folder on the counter right in front of her. I didn't yell. I didn't have the energy left for that. I just asked her how she could sleep at night knowing she had robbed a kid who couldn't even walk straight. She didn't look guilty. She didn't even look surprised. She just stopped what she was doing, leaned against the counter, and gave me a look of pure, cold condescension. "You think you're entitled to that money, Ethan?" she asked, her voice as sharp as a razor. "I changed your diapers. I sat in those hospital waiting rooms for hundreds of hours. I listened to your crying and your complaining for 18 years. That money wasn't for you. It was compensation for the life I had to give up to raise a child that wasn't even mine. I earned every cent of that settlement just by putting up with you. If the hospital messed up and gave me the wrong kid, why should I be the one to suffer? I took what was owed to me for my lost time." I felt a surge of nausea. She talked about me like I was a faulty product she had been forced to lease. I realized then that she had probably known about the DNA long before 2 months ago. She likely found out years ago and kept it quiet just so she could keep accessing the trust fund until I turned 18. The eviction wasn't just about moving on. It was about cutting the final tie before I could realize what she had done. If I was out of the house and out of her life, she figured I'd be too busy trying to survive on the streets to look into the finances. I asked her about my real parents. I asked if she ever tried to find the family I actually belonged to. She just laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. She told me she didn't care where I came from, and she certainly didn't want to meet the people who ended up with her healthy child. That was the most chilling part. She was convinced that somewhere out there, a perfect version of her life was being lived by someone else, and she blamed me for the swap. That night, the pain in my hip was worse than usual. It felt like a hot iron was being pressed into my bone. I didn't take the painkillers. I wanted to feel it. I wanted the reminder of what she had stolen from me. I stayed up until dawn, searching for the name of the lawyer who had handled the settlement. I found a name, Marcus Thorne. He was based in the city, about 2 hours away. I knew I had to get to him before the 30 days were up. But things were about to get much worse. The next morning, I woke up to find the internet had been cut off and my phone service was disabled. She was cutting my links to the outside world, one by one. She wanted me isolated. She wanted me weak. When I went to the kitchen to get water, I saw that she had put a padlock on the pantry and the refrigerator. She looked at me and said, "Since you're not my son and you're so worried about your money, you can start paying for your own food. Or you can leave early. I'd prefer if you just left." I stood there in the middle of the kitchen, 18 years old, chronically in pain, with no family, no phone, and a padlock between me and a meal. I looked at the calendar on the wall. 20 days left. I wasn't just fighting for a place to live anymore. I was fighting a woman who had spent my entire life preparing to destroy me. I went back to my room and started looking for anything I could sell. I needed a bus ticket to the city. I needed to find Marcus Thorne. And I needed to find out who I actually was before Sarah managed to erase my existence entirely. By the 15th day, the hunger had shifted from a sharp, demanding growl in my stomach to a dull, hollow ache that made my head swim every time I stood up too fast. Sarah had become a ghost who only materialized to humiliate me, spent most of her time out of the house, and when she was home, she would sit in the kitchen eating takeout, letting the smell of grilled chicken or greasy burgers waft under my bedroom door while I chewed on the last of some stale crackers I had hidden in a shoebox. The physical pain in my hip was peaking because I couldn't afford to buy more ibuprofen after she stole the $20 bill I had left on my nightstand, claiming it was rent for the air I was breathing. I realized then that she wasn't just waiting for the 30 days to be over. She was actively trying to break me so that I would leave early and leave behind everything I owned, including the documents I had found. She wanted me gone. But more than that, she wanted me silenced and discredited before I could ever talk to a lawyer. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday afternoon when I tried to sneak out of the house to go to my shift at the warehouse. I needed that paycheck. It was my only ticket to the city to find Marcus Thorne. As I reached for the front door handle, Sarah stepped out from the living room. Her face twisted into a mask of cold fury that I had never seen before, even during our worst arguments. She didn't say a word at first. She just held up my work vest, the one I had left drying on the porch, and I saw that she had shredded it with kitchen shears until it was nothing but a pile of orange nylon ribbons. She told me she had called my manager and informed him that I was having a mental breakdown, that I was addicted to the painkillers I took for my hip, and that I had stolen money from her purse to fund my habit. She told him I was dangerous and that he shouldn't be surprised if I didn't show up because she was considering committing me for my own safety. I felt the blood drain from my face as the reality of her words hit me. She had destroyed my only source of income and my reputation in a single 10-minute phone call. When I tried to push past her to get to the door, she shoved me back. And because of my hip, I didn't have the balance to stay upright. I hit the floor hard, a white-hot flash of agony radiating through my leg that made my vision go black for a second. As I lay there, gasping for air and clutching my side, she leaned over me and whispered that if I didn't hand over the blue folder I had found in the closet, she would call the police right then and tell them I had physically assaulted her. She already had her phone in her hand. The screen lit up with the digits 911, her thumb hovering over the call button with a terrifying level of calculation. She wasn't my mother. She was a predator who had spent 18 years studying my every weakness, just so she could use them against me when I finally became an inconvenience. I crawled back to my room and locked the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. And I realized I couldn't stay in this house for the remaining 15 days because I genuinely didn't know if I would survive her care. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway an hour later, likely going to the store or to meet the real estate agent, and I moved as fast as my body would allow. I packed the blue folder, my birth certificate, and the DNA results into my backpack, Along with 2 changes of clothes and a heavy metal trophy I had won in a middle school science fair. The only thing I had that felt like a weapon. I climbed out of my first-floor bedroom window because I was too afraid she had rigged the front door or was watching from the street, and I began the 2-mile limp toward the public library, which was the only place left where I could get free internet and a phone. When I finally got there, my leg was trembling so violently I had to collapse into a chair in the back corner of the reference section. I used the library computer to look up Marcus Thorne, the lawyer from the settlement papers, and what I found made my stomach turn over. He wasn't just a lawyer who handled medical malpractice. He had been disbarred 5 years ago for embezzling funds from client trust accounts, and there were several news articles linking him to a series of unethical settlements involving the very hospital where I was born. But the most chilling detail was a small obituary from 3 years ago. Marcus Thorne had died in a hit-and-run accident that was never solved. I sat there in the flickering light of the monitor, realizing that the one person who could prove Sarah had stolen my money was dead, and the firm he worked for had been dissolved years ago. I was 18, homeless in all but name, starving, and the paper trail I was following seemed to lead directly into a graveyard. As I scrolled through the old archives of the local newspaper, I found a photo of the hospital staff from the year I was born, and in the background of a group shot, I saw a younger Sarah standing next to a woman who looked so much like me it felt like looking into a distorted mirror. The woman in the photo wasn't a nurse or a doctor. She was wearing a patient's gown, and she was holding a baby with a blanket that had my initials embroidered on the corner. The caption didn't give her name, but it listed her as a victim of a tragic post-operative complication that same week. I looked at the date of the photo and then at the date on my DNA test results, and the math didn't add up. Sarah hadn't found out I wasn't hers 2 months ago. She had known since the very first day. And as I sat there, I saw a dark SUV pull into the library parking lot. The same one Sarah had been driving for years. She hadn't gone to the store. She had followed me. I watched through the window as she got out of the car, not looking angry anymore, but looking perfectly calm, carrying a manila envelope and talking into her phone. I knew then that the hard conflict wasn't over. It was just moving to a place where there were no witnesses. I had 14 days left on my eviction notice, but I realized I might not even have 14 minutes before she tried to finish what she started 18 years ago. I didn't wait for her to walk through the library doors. I shoved the blue folder into my bag and slipped out the emergency exit, the alarm wailing behind me. The noise bought me the only thing I lacked: time. I ducked behind a row of industrial trash bins, my breath coming in ragged gasps that tasted like copper. I watched from the shadows as Sarah ran toward the exit, her face no longer the mask of a grieving mother, but that of a woman who had just lost a valuable piece of property. She looked frantic, scanning the street, her phone still pressed to her ear. I didn't head for the bus station. I knew she'd check there first. Instead, I started walking toward the only place I had left, the hospital where it all began. My leg was screaming. Every step felt like a nail being driven into my hip socket, but the adrenaline was acting like a cheap anesthetic. I spent the next 6 hours sitting in the back of a 24-hour diner 3 blocks from the hospital, using their free Wi-Fi to dig deeper into the woman from the photo. I didn't search for Ethan's mother. I searched for lawsuit hospital malpractice and the name of the woman who died the week I was born, Elena Vance. The twist didn't just break my heart. It shattered my entire understanding of reality. Elena Vance hadn't died of a complication. She was the one who had filed the malpractice suit against the hospital before she passed. But the suit wasn't about a hip deformity. It was about a massive, multimillion-dollar error involving a pharmaceutical trial she had been part of while pregnant. And here was the kicker. The settlement wasn't just for me. It was for the surviving family. Sarah hadn't just ended up with me. She had worked at that hospital as a night shift clerk. She had seen a dying woman with no next of kin and a massive settlement on the horizon, and she had swapped the babies. I wasn't a mix-up. I was a heist. The healthy child Sarah always complained about losing, he didn't exist. She had stolen me because I was a walking, breathing paycheck. The DNA test she showed me on my birthday wasn't a revelation for her. It was a weapon. She had used it to make me feel worthless so that when she finally kicked me out, I wouldn't have the confidence to claim the remainder of the trust. But there was one thing she hadn't counted on. Elena Vance hadn't been alone. The records showed she had a brother, a man named Thomas Vance, who had spent the last decade trying to find out what happened to his sister's missing child. I found a phone number for a construction firm in Oregon owned by a Thomas Vance. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. I had $3 left on a burner SIM card. I dialed. A man with a deep, weary voice answered. "Mr. Vance." I whispered, my voice cracking. "My name is Ethan. I'm calling from Ohio. I think you've been looking for me for 18 years. There was a long silence on the other end, then the sound of a chair scraping against a floor. "Ethan? Where are you? Are you safe?" I told him everything. I told him about the hip, the surgeries that were actually paid for by my own stolen trust, and the eviction notice. He told me to stay put, that he was getting on the next flight, but then he said something that turned my blood to ice. "Ethan, listen to me. The lawyer, Thorne. He didn't die in an accident. He was about to testify against the hospital and the clerk who helped forge the birth certificates. The police thought it was a hit and run, but my private investigator found evidence of witness tampering. You need to get away from that woman. Now." I hung up and looked toward the diner window. Sarah's SUV was idling in the parking lot across the street. She wasn't getting out. She was just sitting there watching the entrance. She had tracked my phone's GPS before I could disable it. I realized then that the eviction notice wasn't about the house. It was a countdown. She needed me gone before my 18th birthday audit of the trust triggered an automatic investigation. I looked at the calendar on my phone. 24 hours remained until the final deadline. My mother was sitting 30 yards away, and I knew she wasn't waiting for me to leave. She was waiting for the sun to go down so she could ensure I never made it to that audit. I had a choice. I could stay in this diner and hope Thomas got here in time, or I could confront the woman who had stolen my life and demand the one thing she couldn't buy with my money: the truth. I stood up, my hip grinding with a dull roar of pain, and walked toward the door. I didn't head for the back exit this time. I walked straight toward the SUV. I had spent 18 years being afraid of her. I wasn't going to spend the 19th being a ghost. As I reached the car, she rolled down the window. Her face was calm, but her eyes were empty. "Get in, Ethan," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "We need to finish this." I looked at her, then at the blue folder in my hand. "I know about Elena," I said. The look of pure, predatory calculation that crossed her face told me everything I needed to know. I was no longer a son or even a victim. I was a loose end. I didn't get in the car. I stood by the driver's side window, the cold night air biting at my skin, and watched the mask of Sarah finally crumble. She didn't scream or deny it. Instead, she let out a short, jagged laugh that sounded like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "You always were a smart kid, Ethan. Too smart for your own good. If you had just been a little more broken, maybe we could have ridden this out until the end." She gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned a ghostly white. She told me that the audit was scheduled for the following morning at 9 a.m., and if I wasn't there to sign the release forms, the remaining funds, about $80,000, would default to her as my legal guardian because of a loophole Thorne had helped her craft years ago. "You've already stolen hundreds of thousands," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my legs. "Wasn't that enough to buy a conscience?" "It was never about the money, not at first," she hissed, leaning closer to the window. "It was about the injustice. Elena was going to die anyway. She had everything: a brother who loved her, a settlement that would have made her life easy. And what did I have? A dead-end job and a mountain of debt. I took what the universe owed me. You were just the vessel for that payment. I kept you alive, didn't I? I gave you a roof. I gave you a name. You gave me a prison," I replied. I looked down at my phone. Thomas had sent me a screenshot of his boarding pass. He would land in 3 hours. But the audit was in 12. I turned and began to walk away, toward the bright lights of a nearby gas station where I knew there were cameras. I didn't look back when I heard her engine roar. I didn't look back when she peeled out of the parking lot, leaving a trail of burnt rubber. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the lobby of a local police station. I didn't file a report yet. I knew Sarah would claim I was off my meds. I just sat there, clutching the blue folder, watching the clock move toward 9 a.m. At 8:45 a.m., I walked into the probate office in the city. My hair was a mess, my clothes were wrinkled, and I was limping so badly I had to lean on the walls. Sarah was already there, sitting in the waiting area, looking like the picture of a concerned, grieving mother in a modest floral dress. When she saw me, her eyes flared with a brief, murderous spark, but she quickly masked it with a fake smile for the clerk. We were called into a small, wood-paneled office. The auditor, a gray-haired man named Mr. Henderson, began laying out the final papers. Since Mr. Thorne is deceased, we've done a preliminary scan of the disbursements, he said, peering over his glasses. There are some irregularities. But Ethan, if you sign these acknowledgments of care, we can close the file today and release the remaining balance to your mother's account for your continued transition into adulthood. I looked at the pen. I looked at Sarah. She was leaning forward, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed on the money. This was the moment she had spent 18 years preparing for. I'm not signing, I said. The room went silent. Sarah's fake smile vanished. Ethan, honey, don't be difficult. You're tired. You're not thinking straight. I'm not signing because I'm not her son, I interrupted, placing the DNA results and the photo from the library on the desk. And this money isn't a gift. It's the evidence of a kidnapping and 18 years of systematic theft. The next hour was a blur of shouting, security guards, and the sudden, thunderous arrival of Thomas Vance. He burst into the room with a lawyer of his own, carrying a stack of records that Sarah hadn't been able to hide. Elena's original medical intake forms. When he saw me, he didn't see a defective kid. He saw his sister's eyes. He didn't even look at the money. He just walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. For the first time in 18 years, I didn't flinch from a touch. Sarah wasn't arrested that day. Legal systems move slower than stories do. No, the audit was frozen. An investigation was launched into the hospital records and the disappeared trust funds. She left the office in silence, realizing that in her greed to get the last $80,000, she had exposed the millions she had already spent. As I stood on the sidewalk outside the office, the 30-day countdown finally hitting 0, the world felt terrifyingly quiet. Thomas offered to take me to Oregon to get me the best surgeons to give me the life I should have had. But as I looked at the city skyline, I realized something. I had spent my whole life being defined by what was wrong with me. My hip, my brokenness, my status as a burden. I had spent 18 years being a paycheck for a woman who didn't exist. I realized that family isn't about blood, and it's not even about the people who raise you. It's about the truth you're willing to live with. Sarah thought she won because she got the money, but she ended up with nothing but a trail of crimes and a hollow house. I ended up with a broken body and a bank account at 0, but for the first time, my name was actually mine. I looked at Thomas and told him I'd go with him, but not because I needed a savior. I went because I wanted to finally meet the person I was supposed to be before the world decided I was an error. The house in Ohio was sold a week later. I didn't go back for my things. There was nothing in that house that belonged to me anyway. I left it all, the pain, the locks on the fridge, the orange ribbons of my work vest, in the past. Some people say that money can't buy happiness, but they're wrong. Can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy back the 18 years Sarah spent hating a child she stole. And as I watched the sunset from the plane window, I realized that was the only thing I truly owned. The fact that, despite everything, I was still here.